People think a hearse is empty once the body is unloaded, that once the coffin is removed, the job is done. That belief is wrong. I learned that on a late afternoon funeral run that still follows me every time I sit behind the wheel. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. Our little community stretches farther than you think, and I want to hear from you. Subscribe if you haven't yet. These real horror stories take everything out of me to share, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Let's begin. I've been a professional hearse driver for over a decade. I transport the dead, but I also transport the living, grieving families who choose to ride along behind the casket. It's not unusual. Some families want to stay close. Some don't trust the body being alone. Some just can't bear the distance. That day, a widow and her adult son rode in the back seat with me. Quiet, polite, heavy with grief. The casket sat between us in the partitioned rear, flowers resting on top, air thick with lilies and silence. The drive to the cemetery was uneventful. No strange noises, no cold spots, no flickering lights. The funeral proceeded normally. After the graveside service, staff transferred the coffin for burial. The family thanked me and walked away together, arms linked, shoulders shaking. I watched them go. Then I returned to the hearse alone. That's when I felt it. As soon as I sat down and closed the driver's door, the vehicle shifted slightly, just enough to register. A subtle dip, like someone settling into the back seat. I checked the mirror. Empty. I glanced over my shoulder. No one there. I told myself it was suspension adjustment. Weight redistribution after unloading. Happens all the time. I started the engine. As I pulled away, the feeling didn't change. It felt like someone was still sitting behind me. Not looming, not aggressive, just present. You know when someone sits in your car and you don't need to look to know they're there? The way the air feels different. The way your body instinctively accounts for another person. That's what it felt like. I adjusted the rearview mirror again. Clear, empty bench seat. I drove back to the funeral home with my shoulders tense and my jaw locked. Every turn felt heavier than it should have. Every stop felt delayed, like the hearse was carrying more than it should. When I parked in the bay and shut off the engine, the sensation didn't lift. The weight stayed. I opened the driver's door and stepped out. As soon as my foot hit the ground, the car rose slightly, like someone had stood up. I stared at the open door for a long moment, heart hammering. Then I laughed, forced, nervous. "Get it together," I muttered. I checked the back seat, ran my hand along the upholstery. Nothing, no warmth, no indentation. That night, I drove home in my personal car, trying to shake the feeling. The next morning, I reported for another funeral. Different family, different deceased. As soon as I sat in the driver's seat of the hearse before anyone else got in, the weight returned. Instantly, like it had been waiting. I froze. I checked the mirrors. Empty. I shifted in my seat. The pressure shifted with me, adjusting, accommodating. When the family arrived, 2 parents and a teenage daughter, they climbed into the back seat quietly. The moment they sat down, the weight changed. It didn't disappear. It moved. It felt like someone had slid closer to the center, like space had been made. During the drive, the daughter kept glancing at the empty space beside her. Finally, she leaned forward and whispered, "Mom, who's sitting next to me?" Her mother stiffened. "No one," she said quickly. Too quickly. The father said nothing. He just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, knuckles white. The rest of the ride passed in silence. At the cemetery, the family exited first. As soon as the last door closed, the weight shifted again, back to where it had been before. I didn't unload the coffin right away. I sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing slowly. "You're done," I said aloud. "The service is over." The pressure didn't move. The coffin was removed. The rear compartment was empty. The back seat was empty. The weight remained. It stayed with me for 3 days. Every drive, every stop, every start, it never appeared in mirrors, never made a sound, never touched me. It just sat. On the 4th day, I had another family ride along. As the coffin was loaded, the weight intensified, pressing down harder than ever before. The suspension groaned slightly. When the family got in, the feeling finally eased, not gone, satisfied. After the service, as the coffin was transferred for burial, I felt the pressure begin to lift, but not completely. Back at the funeral home, the director noticed my face. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He nodded slowly and said, "It happens sometimes." He explained that certain deceased don't detach easily, especially those who die suddenly, or those who relied heavily on others in life, or those who fear being alone. They stay until there's another body, he said. Something about continuity, presence. That afternoon, a new call came in. Another death, another transfer. As soon as the next coffin was placed inside the hearse, the weight vanished, instantly. The vehicle felt light again, empty, normal. I sat there for a long time before starting the engine. Now, whenever families ride with me, I watch them closely. I pay attention to where they look, who they react to, what they feel but don't say. And I never assume the hearse is empty just because the mirrors say it is. Because sometimes the passenger doesn't leave when the body does. Sometimes they stay, waiting until someone else takes their place. Years of driving a hearse teach you to ignore most sounds, until a coffin begins knocking every time the engine shuts off. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echo from the back, stopping only when the motor runs. What was discovered about the body inside turned a routine funeral transport into a chilling encounter with a spirit that feared silence. This is a creepy funeral ghost story told by a hearse driver, where stopping the engine means you're no longer alone. I've been a hearse driver for 17 years, long enough to stop believing every noise means something, long enough to know which rattles come from loose trim, which thuds come from potholes, and which sounds are just your mind filling in gaps when the road goes quiet. This was not one of those sounds. It started on a Tuesday morning, overcast, damp, the kind of gray that sinks into your bones. I was assigned a transfer run. Early pickup from a county morgue, short drive to a family-owned funeral home on the outskirts of town. No procession, no mourners. Just me, the vehicle, and a sealed coffin in the back. The decedent was elderly, recently exhumed for reburial, according to the paperwork. No family present, no viewing. Everything routine. I loaded the coffin myself, secured it with straps, checked the latches twice. I remember that clearly because I'm meticulous about those checks. You learn fast in this job that mistakes don't forgive you. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the main road. At the first red light, I eased the Hearse to a stop and shifted into park. The engine idled softly, a low, steady hum. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks. Not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. They came from directly behind my seat, from the cargo compartment. I froze with my hands still on the gear shift. I waited for the follow-up sound. The creak of wood settling, the clink of metal, anything that could explain it. Nothing. The light turned green. I shifted back into drive. The Hearse rolled forward. Silence. No knocks. I told myself it was coincidence. Wood expands and contracts. Temperature changes. Old coffins do strange things when they've been moved. 10 minutes later, I pulled over to check my phone. Engine off. Silence rushed in, thick and heavy. Then, 3 knocks again. Same rhythm, same spacing, same exact place. Knock, knock, knock. My pulse jumped so hard I could feel it in my throat. I started the engine without thinking. The knocking stopped instantly. I didn't check the back, I didn't get out, I drove. For the rest of that drive, every time I slowed too much, my foot hovered nervously over the gas. When I had to stop at another light, I kept the engine running, even though company policy says to cut it during extended stops. As long as the engine ran, everything stayed quiet. When I reached the funeral home, I parked in the receiving bay and sat there for a full minute before turning the key. I braced myself. The engine shut off. 3 knocks, closer this time, heavier, like something testing the wood. I backed out of the seat so fast I nearly hit the door frame. I didn't wait. I got the staff inside and had them unload the coffin immediately. No pauses, no delays. When the casket was finally inside the building and the doors shut behind it, the silence felt wrong. Too clean, too empty. I filled out my paperwork with shaking hands. One of the funeral directors noticed. "You okay?" he asked. I almost lied. We're trained not to spook staff, not to spread stories, not to give grief more places to grow. But something in his expression made me stop. "Has anyone heard knocking?" I asked carefully. His face changed, just slightly, but enough. He glanced toward the prep room door. "You heard that too?" he asked. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, arms folded tight across his chest. When I finished, he sighed and said, "You should probably know who that was." He pulled the case file. The deceased hadn't died recently. He'd died decades ago. Buried young, declared dead after a mining collapse. No autopsy, no confirmation beyond a doctor's word and a crushed chest. Years later, when the cemetery relocated part of the grounds, they exhumed him. That's when they found the inside of the coffin. Scratch marks, deep grooves, broken fingernails embedded in the wood, evidence of movement, evidence of panic. The official conclusion was burial error. A tragic mistake from another era. The remains were reinterred, sealed again, and forgotten. Until that morning. A new development project forced another exhumation. Same coffin, same remains, same marks. The funeral home had been instructed to rebury him immediately, quietly. "No services," the director said. "No delays." My mouth felt dry. "He was buried alive," I said. The director nodded. "And he hated stillness," he added. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time my house went quiet, my ears strained for sound. I kept replaying the rhythm in my head. Not random, not frantic, measured, intentional, like someone waiting for the moment the world stops moving. I drove the same Hearse the next morning. Different assignment, different decedent. At a stop sign, out of habit, I cut the engine. 3 knocks. I didn't wait this time. I started the engine and drove straight back to the garage. They inspected the vehicle, found nothing loose, nothing broken, no mechanical explanation. But I noticed something no one else did. The sound only ever came when the engine stopped. Never when the Hearse was moving. Never when there was vibration. Only when everything went still. I requested a transfer out of transport within the week. I still work in the funeral industry. I still respect the dead. I still believe most things can be explained, but I will never again turn off the engine with a coffin behind me. Because some people don't fear death, they fear silence. And if you give them a moment of it, they'll knock to remind you they're still there. There are moments in funeral work that never leave you. Not because they're loud, not because they're dramatic, but because they feel wrong in a way your body understands before your mind does. This was one of those moments. I was the Hearse driver assigned to a mid-morning burial just outside town. Small cemetery, old ground, the kind where the soil is dark, uneven, and never quite settles the same way twice. The deceased was a middle-aged man. Sudden death, no warning, no long illness. The family was shaken, quiet, clinging to routine like it was the only thing keeping them upright. The drive was normal. No strange sounds, no uneasy feelings. The family rode behind me in their own cars. No one chose to ride in the hearse this time. At the graveside, the pallbearers positioned themselves carefully. The straps were new, recently inspected. I watched them myself. I always do. The coffin was heavy, but not unusually so. As the casket began to descend, the cemetery went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, snap. One strap gave way. The coffin dipped sharply on one side. Gasps rippled through the mourners. The workers froze, gripping the remaining straps, trying to steady the weight. "Hold it," someone whispered. Then, snap. A second strap broke, then a third, in rapid succession. There was no time to react. The coffin slipped free and dropped. The sound it made when it hit the bottom of the grave was not a thud. It was a hollow, final crack, wood against earth, echoing up through the hole and straight into everyone's chest. Someone screamed. Someone else started crying uncontrollably. I felt my stomach turn cold. The funeral director rushed forward, shouting instructions, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. That sound doesn't fade. It doesn't soften. It stays. They eventually lowered replacement straps and secured the coffin properly, but the atmosphere never recovered. The family left quickly. No lingering, no final moments. As I drove the empty hearse back to the funeral home, the road felt longer than usual, heavier, like something had gone unfinished. That night I dreamed. I was sitting in the driver's seat of the hearse, engine off, headlights dark. The cemetery stretched endlessly around me, graves rolling into the distance like waves. Then the passenger door opened. He stood there, the deceased. Not damaged, not decayed, just wrong. His suit was clean, but his shoes were covered in dirt. Soil clung to his cuffs. His eyes were wide, alert, and deeply offended. "You dropped me," he said calmly. I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't move. He leaned down slightly, peering into the vehicle. "Can you take me back?" he asked. "I don't belong there." I woke up gasping, my heart pounding like I'd been running. The next morning, I convinced myself it was stress, trauma imprinting, a professional hazard. I'd seen worse. That afternoon, I was assigned another pickup. Different location, different deceased. As I approached the hearse, I stopped cold. There were muddy footprints beside the passenger door, fresh, leading up to it. I checked the interior, empty, no smell, no movement, nothing out of place. I drove anyway. At the first stoplight, the passenger seat shifted slightly, just enough to register. That night, the dream returned. He was closer this time, standing beside the hearse, hand resting on the door handle. "They don't want me," he said. The ground pushed me back. I woke up with the distinct sensation that someone had been sitting beside my bed. Over the next few days, strange things followed me on runs. The passenger door unlocking on its own, the seatbelt hanging loose when I knew I'd secured it. A faint smell of turned earth lingering inside the vehicle, only after burials. I finally spoke to the funeral director. His face tightened when I described the straps. "That grave," he said quietly, "has done that before." Apparently the plot had a history. Coffins shifting, equipment failing, one body even resurfacing slightly after burial decades ago. Official explanations blamed soil composition, moisture, human error, but no one liked that ground. A week later, I had another assignment at the same cemetery. Different grave, different family. As I drove past the original plot, I felt it. A sudden heaviness in the passenger seat. I didn't look, I didn't slow down. That night, the dream stopped, the weight lifted. The next time I visited that cemetery, I noticed something. The grave where the coffin had fallen, it had sunk unevenly. The soil never fully settled, almost like the ground itself was still deciding what to do with what it was given. I still drive a hearse, I still attend burials, but whenever a coffin is lowered, I watch the straps with absolute focus, because sometimes it isn't the living who reject the dead. Sometimes the grave does, and when it does, the dead remember who drove them there. In funeral transport, respect isn't optional. It's not superstition. It's not tradition. It's survival. I learned that lesson on a late evening transfer that should have been routine and nearly cost me my peace. It was the end of a long shift. 2 services had run late, paperwork stacked up, traffic worse than expected. By the time I was assigned the final transport, I was tired, irritated, and focused on getting the night over with. That was my mistake. The deceased was a middle-aged man, no family riding along, closed casket, standard hearse transport from the funeral home to a private cemetery holding facility overnight. Simple, quiet, unremarkable. I loaded the coffin myself, secured it properly, closed the rear doors, and got behind the wheel. I drove faster than I should have, not recklessly, but impatiently, hitting the gas a little harder, rolling stops, treating the ride like cargo instead of a person. 5 minutes into the drive, I heard it, a soft rattle, not loud, not sharp, just a gentle shifting sound from the back of the hearse. I frowned but didn't slow down. Old roads cause movement, coffins settle, caskets flex slightly when the suspension shifts. Every hearse driver knows that. Then the sound happened again, this time longer, like something adjusting its position. My shoulders tightened. I checked the rearview mirror out of habit, even though I knew it was pointless. The partition window showed nothing. Darkness, stillness. The rattling continued intermittently, not constant, not rhythmic, reactive. When I sped up, it quieted. When I slowed, it returned. At the next red light, I came to a full stop. The hearse went still. The rattle became clearer, closer, like wood against wood, like a body shifting weight that shouldn't be able to shift. I swallowed hard and stared straight ahead. "This is nothing," I muttered, "just physics." The light stayed red longer than usual. The sound continued, soft, persistent, uncomfortable. For the first time that night, a thought crept in that I didn't like. What if it's not the coffin? What if it's the ride? My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Without fully understanding why, I leaned forward slightly and spoke under my breath. "I'm sorry." The word surprised me. "I shouldn't be rushing," I continued quietly. "I should have taken more care." The rattling stopped, instantly, not tapered off, not faded, stopped. The light turned green. I didn't move right away. My heart hammered in my chest as I listened, truly listened, for any sign of movement. Nothing. I drove the rest of the route slowly, carefully. Smooth turns, gentle stops, respectful pace. The coffin never made another sound. When I arrived at the facility, I parked and shut off the engine. I sat there for a full minute, bracing myself for the noise to return in the silence. It didn't. I unloaded the coffin with care, apologized again under my breath as I guided it inside and completed the transfer. That night, I dreamed. I was driving the hearse down a long, empty road. No headlights, no stars, just darkness. The rattling started again, louder this time. I reached the red light, stopped, and before I could speak, a voice from behind me said calmly, "That's better." I woke up drenched in sweat. The next day, I reviewed the case file more closely. Cause of death, traumatic accident, sudden, violent, no time to prepare, no goodbye. I've handled hundreds of bodies since then, some heavier, some lighter, some far more disturbing. None have made a sound. And I never rush anymore. I drive slower than required. I stop smoothly. I treat every ride like a final favor instead of a task. Because sometimes the dead aren't angry, they're just aware. And all they want is to be acknowledged, treated with dignity, and given the respect they didn't get at the end. Since that night, my hearse has been silent, and I intend to keep it that way. There's an unspoken rule every experienced driver comes to understand. Voices are not discussed. Engines make noise. Tires hum. Wind moves strangely around a hearse. Your mind fills gaps when you're tired. So when you hear something that sounds like a voice, you explain it away and keep driving. That rule failed me on a quiet morning at the cemetery gate. I was assigned an early burial, first slot of the day. The kind families choose when they want privacy. The deceased was an older man, no immediate relatives. A small graveside service planned for later. My job was simply to deliver the coffin and stage the hearse near the plot. The drive was calm, no traffic, overcast sky, the sort of stillness that makes sound travel farther than it should. As I approached the cemetery, I slowed at the iron gate and eased the hearse to a stop. That's when I heard it, from directly behind me. A quiet, clear voice said, "Thank you for the ride." Not loud, not whispered, polite. My hands locked on the steering wheel. The engine was still running, the radio was off, there was no one riding with me, no family, no attendant, no reason for a human voice to be inside that vehicle. I checked the rearview mirror, empty. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance toward the partition window. Nothing. My chest felt tight, like my body was bracing for something my mind refused to name. I didn't answer. I shifted into drive and rolled through the gate. As the hearse moved forward, the air inside felt lighter, almost relieved. I parked near the assigned plot and waited for the cemetery staff to arrive. When the attendant finally pulled up, he looked confused. "You're early," he said. "I'm on time," I replied. "First delivery." He hesitated. "That's strange," he said. "Someone's already been here for a bit." I frowned. "Family?" He shook his head. "No, just someone standing by the grave." My stomach dropped. "Standing?" I asked. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Older guy, nice suit, very calm, thought he was with you." I didn't respond. The attendant gestured toward the plot. "He was right there earlier, waiting." "Where is he now?" I asked. The attendant shrugged. "Vanished. Figured he went back to his car." I looked at the hearse, at the sealed coffin. At the quiet space behind me, the rest of the staging went smoothly. The coffin was unloaded, positioned properly, everything by the book. But the entire time, I had the unmistakable feeling of being watched, not threatened, observed. That night, I replayed the voice in my head, not demanding, not angry, grateful. The next morning, I checked the paperwork more closely. The deceased had lived alone, no close relatives. One note stood out in the file, something the funeral director had scribbled in the margin. Requested simple burial, no prolonged transport delays. I tried to forget it. A week later, I returned to the same cemetery for a different service. As I approached the gate again, I slowed instinctively. Nothing happened, no voice, no sound, but the attendant waved me down. "Hey," he called out, "you drive this route a lot, right?" "Yes," I said. He nodded toward the older section of the cemetery. "You ever notice that gentleman who stands near the gate sometimes? Always shows up early?" My pulse spiked. What gentleman? He described him calmly. Suit, age, calm posture, hands folded neatly in front of him. Exactly the description of the deceased. He's polite, the attendant added. Never says much, just waits, then he's gone. I didn't tell him what I knew. I didn't need to. Since that day, I've driven dozens of funeral routes, hundreds of cemetery entrances, and sometimes, only sometimes, when I slow at the gate, I feel it. A presence beside me, not inside the hearse. Not behind me, but ahead, waiting. And every time I pass through without stopping too long, the air feels just a little lighter, like someone has already arrived and no longer needs the ride.